The flight attendant's voice. Chad rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." His words carried a sharp edge, his tone dripping with condescension. Keisha, the black woman, calm as ever, looked up at him. "I've already told you I'm not moving," she said. Simply, her tone was even almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength as she was humiliated in front of everyone. But no one expected what would happen next, when the woman they thought was powerless stood up and revealed who she really was. As we delve into the story, if you believe everyone should be treated with respect no matter what their color is, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you are watching from. The plane gleamed under the afternoon sun, its sleek design promising a luxurious journey for its passengers. Inside the cabin was nothing short of opulence, plus leather seats, gold accents, and an air of exclusivity that made everyone inside feel like royalty. Passengers move with ease, their expensive luggage rolling behind them as they are ushered toward the sleek private jet waiting on the tarmacs. Soon they settled into their spots, some scrolling through their devices, others sipping champagne offered by the attentive flight crew. Inside the plane, a soft ambient music plays in the background. Among them was Keisha Washington, a calm and composed black woman in her late 30s, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks. Keisha exuded an understated elegance as she moved with quiet confidence. Though she made no effort to draw attention to herself, Keisha Washington steps into the cabin, her calm presence drawing attention to her. Her steps are measured and her gaze sweeps the cabin briefly before she moves toward her seat. Her destination wasn't just another trip, it was a journey to oversee her growing empire. Though no one on board yet knew who she was, she preferred it that way for now. Chad, the lead flight attendant, stands near the entrance, his crisp uniform perfectly tailored, his sharp features exuding control as he greets the passengers one by one. His smile warm for some, colder for others. He prides himself on keeping order on the plane, though his idea of order often depends on how people look or behave. Chad's welcoming tone shifts subtly as he greets Keisha with a curt welcome on board, the warmth noticeably absent. Behind Keisha, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson sat. The couple in their 60s exuded the ease of seasoned travelers. Mrs. Henderson clutches a small knitting bag, her fingers already twitching to begin her work, while Mr. Henderson carries a folded newspaper, his expression one of mild curiosity as he takes in the scene. Chad's smile brightens for them. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. Lovely to have you with us again." Keisha glances over her shoulder, noticing the stark contrast in Chad's tone. Her expression remains calm, though. Her eyes reflect an awareness of the unspoken dynamics at play as other passengers settle. Chad moves through the cabin, ensuring everything is in place. He checks the Henderson couple, offering them a bright smile. "Is there anything I can get for you before we take off?" Mrs. Henderson shakes her head politely, already absorbed in her knitting, and Mr. Henderson nods towards his coffee, indicating he's satisfied. When Chad passes Keisha, his demeanor shifts again. He glances at Keisha's bag resting neatly under the seat, and his lips press into a thin line. He doesn't offer the same courtesy or warmth to her. Rather, he simply walked by without a word. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's attitude shifted based on appearances? Share your experience in the comments below and click on the subscribe button. Chad Peterson, in his early 40s, carried himself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. His pristine uniform and perfectly coiffed hair matched his sharp demeanor. To Chad, appearances mattered more than anything else, and his judgments were swift and unapologetic. Chad's eyes narrowed as he watched Keisha settle in. Something about Keisha didn't sit right with him. Not her clothes, not her calm, not her self-assurance, and not the fact that she didn't immediately seek attention like many of the passengers whom Chad deemed worthy of respect. In Chad's mind, Keisha simply didn't belong. He approached Keisha with quick, purposeful strides, his lips curling into a tight smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but dripping with condescension. "I think you're in the wrong section." Keisha glanced up at him, her expression calm. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, her voice steady. Chad's smile didn't waver, but his tone sharpened. "I don't think so. This section is reserved for our elite passengers." Nearby, the other passengers began to notice the exchange, and a nosy socialite sitting leaned slightly to get a better view. Her curiosity piqued. A friendly businessman across the aisle glanced over, frowning slightly at Chad's tone. Keisha remained composed, her gaze steady as she replied, "You might want to double-check your passenger list before making assumptions." Chad's eyebrows arched, his irritation barely hidden. "I don't need to check anything," he said sharply. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The tension in the cabin thickened. The passengers exchanged glances, whispering quietly to each other. Others, uncomfortable, pretended not to notice. One passenger muttered, "Why doesn't she just move if she's in the wrong seat?" Another shrugged, "She's probably trying to sneak in for a free upgrade." Chad crossed his arms, standing his ground. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," he said, his voice loud enough for others to hear, "I'll have to call security." Keisha tilted her head slightly, her calm expression unwavering. "Call whoever you need to," she said, "but I'm not moving." The nosy socialite gasped softly. The businessman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Chad, now visibly frustrated, turned to the junior flight attendant, Emma, who stood nearby watching nervously. "Emma," Chad snapped, "escort her to the back now." Emma hesitated, glancing between Isabella and Chad. She wanted to speak up to say something about checking the passenger list, as Isabella had suggested, but Chad's sharp glare froze her in place. Reluctantly, she nodded and stepped forward. Isabella shifted slightly in her seat, her calm demeanor still intact. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," she said. Softly, her words carrying more weight than Chad realized. Chad scoffed, waving off the warning. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said. "Now get up." What would you do if someone treated you like this on a flight? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're loving this story so far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. Chad's tone grew sharper as he gestured toward the back of the plane. "You're not supposed to be here," he said again, his voice now tinged with impatience. The passengers watched in stunned silence, while the tension crackling in the air like static. Keisha leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on Chad. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said quietly. Chad's smirk widened. "And you shouldn't be in seats you didn't pay for." The cliffhanger came as Keisha finally picked up her phone, her calm expression unchanging. She typed something quickly, then set it back down on the armrest. "You're making a mistake," she said simply, her words hanging in the air. Chad didn't listen. "We'll see about that," he muttered, gesturing again for Emma to act. The junior attendant stepped closer, her hesitation palpable as the scene continued to unfold. Chad's irritation only grew as Keisha remained seated, her quiet confidence a stark contrast to Chad's increasingly flustered demeanor. The tension in the cabin thickened with every passing moment, drawing the attention of nearby passengers who watched the exchange with curiosity and disbelief. Chad's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." His words carried a sharp edge, his tone dripping with condescension. Keisha, calm as ever, looked up at Chad. "I've already told you I'm not moving," she said. Simply, her tone was even almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength that only infuriated Chad further. A woman ahead, the nosy socialite with perfectly coiffed hair and an air of entitlement, leaned toward her companion. She whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "Looks like she's trying to sneak in for a free ride." Chad seized on the comment, his smirk returning. "That's exactly what it looks like," he said, folding his arms and turning to the other passengers as though rallying support. "We have rules for a reason. Some people just don't respect them." Keisha didn't respond to the insults or the growing murmurs around her. Instead, she kept her gaze steady on Chad, her composure of quiet defiance that spoke louder than any word. Emma hesitated, then took a step toward the passenger list, clipped near the cockpit door. Her fingers trembled as she scanned the names, hoping to find something that would help Keisha. But before she could say anything, Chad snapped. "Emma, what are you doing?" Emma turned, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just checking." "I've got this under control," Chad interrupted, his tone sharp. "You don't need to get involved." Emma stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment. She bit her lip, torn between doing what she knew was right and the fear of losing her job. As the tension built, A kindly-looking man seated across the aisle leaned forward. The businessman, dressed in a crisp suit and exuding a calm demeanor, smiled at Keisha. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Is everything all right?" Keisha turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, her voice steady but grateful for the small act of kindness. Before the businessman could say more, Chad interjected, his tone accusing. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage the disturbance." He turned back to Keisha, pointing a finger at her. "You're causing a scene." The businessman frowned. "From where I'm sitting," he said calmly, "you're the one making a scene." Chad's face flushed with anger, and he turned his attention back to Keisha. "I've had enough of this," he snapped. "Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane." Keisha met his gaze without flinching. "You can try," she said softly. Chad's frustration boiled. His voice shook as he leaned closer to Keisha. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Keisha remained silent, her calmness only fueling Chad's anger. Chad finally left Keisha alone and turned to carry out his other duties angrily. Chad moved briskly down the aisle, his polished shoes clicking softly on the carpet as he carried a tray of sparkling water, his demeanor professional but his expression tight with irritation. Keisha sat quietly in her seat, her attention focused on the book and her hands. Passengers chatted softly, the atmosphere calm, until Chad's subtle hostility began to surface again. Keisha had been waiting patiently for a drink, watching as Chad served Mr. and Mrs. Henderson first, then moved to others in the back. Chad, however, made no effort to acknowledge Keisha. The tray was nearly empty when Keisha finally spoke, her tone gentle. "Excuse me, could I have some water, please?" Chad paused, glancing at Keisha with a dismissive look. "I'll get to you when I can," he said, curtly walking past without another word. Keisha's calm gaze followed Chad's retreating figure, but she remained silent. "What would you do if you noticed this kind of behavior? Would you step in or stay quiet? Let us know in the comments below." Minutes passed, and Keisha shifted in her seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. She stretched one leg slightly into the aisle, her movement unassuming. Chad returned, tray in hand, his sharp eyes catching the small adjustment. Instead of asking Keisha to move her leg, Chad deliberately changed her path in an instant. Chad's foot struck Keisha's leg. The tray tilted, and the glasses of water tumbled forward, splashing onto Keisha's lap. Chad gasped theatrically, his voice sharp and loud. "Watch where you're putting your legs! You've caused a mess." Passengers turned their heads, startled by the commotion. Keisha looked up, startled but composed. Her hands brushing at the water on her trousers, she said calmly, "But you walked into my leg." Keisha tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze unwavering. "I've only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," she replied. "And if that's too much to ask, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air, a quiet yet powerful rebuke. Chad's face flushed with anger. He stepped closer, his frustration boiling over. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he hissed, his voice sharp, and then in a shocking moment, unable to contain himself, Chad raised his hand and slapped Keisha across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and shocking, through the cabin like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the passengers. The businessman stood halfway, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Even the nosy socialite appeared taken aback, her previous smirk replaced by a look of unease. Keisha slowly straightened her hand, resting calmly on her laps. Her expression remained composed, her gaze steady as she looked up at Chad. The cabin was silent, the tension palpable. Keisha now straightened in her seat. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes carried a weight that made Chad hesitate. "For the first time, you just made the worst mistake of your life," Keisha said quietly, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a knife. "What would you do if you were in Keisha's shoes?" Let us know in the comments below, and if this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe now. Keisha looked up at Chad, her voice steady and composed. "I've been patient with you, but your behavior has crossed the line," she said, her words deliberate and firm. Chad's expression darkened, his jaw tightened, and his hands clenched at his sides. "Cross the line," he snapped, his voice rising. You're the one who's been disruptive since you got on this plane. Keisha didn't flinch. She didn't touch her face or respond in any kind. Instead, she slowly straightened her posture, her gaze fixed firmly on Chad. Her calm demeanor remained intact, even in the face of such blatant aggression. "You'll regret that," Keisha said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire cabin. Chad faltered for a moment, his confidence shaken by Keisha's unyielding composure, but he quickly recovered, scoffing loudly. "Regret it?" he sneered. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" Keisha didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, and the passengers could feel the shift in power from the corner of the cabin. Emma, the younger flight attendant, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and determination. She had been quietly observing Chad's behavior all day, her discomfort growing with every passing moment. Now she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Discreetly, Emma stepped away from the commotion and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number quickly, her fingers trembling slightly. When the call connected, her voice was hushed but firm. "It's Emma," she said. "We have a situation on the plane." Emma returned to her post, her face a mix of worry and determination. Chad, oblivious to the call, stood with his arms crossed, his anger simmering but his authority waning. Keisha remained seated, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Chad's rage. Passengers continued to watch, their eyes darting between Keisha and Chad, unsure of what would happen next. One of them leaned toward Keisha, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern genuine. Keisha turned to her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. The tension in the cabin was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engine. It was clear that the situation was far from over. Keisha remained seated, her posture steady despite the water dripping onto her clothing. She looked at Chad, her voice calm but firm. "All you had to do was treat me with respect, but you failed because of your prejudice, thinking I don't belong here, just because you feel so." Chad's irritation deepened, his grip on the tray tightened as he leaned closer, his tone mocking. "Respect? Maybe you should earn it first. People like you don't deserve my respect." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, unsure of how to react. The unspoken question lingered in the air. How far would this go? At this point, Keisha's anger rose. "You shouldn't have said that," Keisha said, her voice sharp but firm. Her words carried an unspoken weight, leaving everyone in the cabin wondering what would happen next. Chad folded his arms, his anger still simmering. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "I've been more than patient with you. Maybe now you'll understand that actions have consequences." Keisha's eyes narrowed slightly, her calm demeanor still unbroken. "You're right," she said softly, her words deliberate. "Actions do have consequences, and you're about to find out just how true that is." For a moment, Chad faltered. Something in Keisha's tone sent a chill down his belly, but he quickly pushed the feeling aside. "I'm not afraid of your empty threats," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You're the one who regret this, not me." Chad turned away, feigning confidence, but deep inside unease began to creep in. He had crossed a line, and though he wouldn't admit it, he knew it. The looks from the passengers, the horrified expression on Emma's face, and Keisha's quiet composure, it all made Chad feel as though the walls were closing in. He tried to shake it off, but his thoughts raced. What if this woman isn't who I think she is? The way Keisha carried herself, the way she spoke with such calm authority, it didn't match Chad's assumptions. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his anger. Chad's unease grew stronger as he replayed the moment in his mind. Why didn't she yell or fight back? Why did she say I'd regret it? His stomach twisted as the realization hit him. He had let his prejudice and anger take over, and now he could smell trouble coming. Chad glanced around the cabin, hoping to find some support, but the passengers were no longer on his side. The businessman glared at him, his arms crossed in silent judgment. The nosy socialite whispered to her companion, shaking her head disapprovingly. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear, her hands trembling as she clutched the passenger list. Keisha, meanwhile, remained seated, her expression calm but unreadable. She crossed her legs, slowly leaning back in her seat with a quiet confidence that made Chad's unease grow deeper. Keisha didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to act out her silence, said everything Chad didn't want to hear. The tension in the cabin thickened as Chad tried to regain control of the situation. But no matter what he said or did, he couldn't shake the feeling that his actions would soon catch up to him. Keisha's words echoed in his mind. "You're making a mistake." Unbeknownst to Chad, Keisha had already sent a message, and her quiet response to the slap wasn't submission, it was strategy. Trouble was brewing, and Chad was about to find out just how big of a mistake he had made. What do you think Keisha should do next? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. The tension in the cabin was thick with Chad pacing back and forth near Keisha's seat, his frustration bubbling over. Keisha remained seated calm and composed as thought the situation wasn't affecting her at all. But deep down, Chad could feel the weight of his actions pressing in on him. Keisha, without a word, reached for her phone. Her movements were deliberate, and she typed something quickly before setting the device on the armrest beside. The gesture seemed simple, but it carried an unspoken power that made Chad glance uneasily at the phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Chad asked, his voice sharp. Keisha didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "You'll find out soon enough," she said softly, her words carrying a weight that made Chad's unease deepen. If you think Chad's reaction was uncalled for, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. Passengers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The nosy socialite leaned toward her companion, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Do you think she's someone important?" The businessman across the aisle sat quietly, a knowing look on his face. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, his gaze fixed on Keisha, as though he had pieced together something no one else had. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps came from the front of the cabin. The cockpit door opened, and the pilot stepped out, his face pale and his expression tight. He scanned the room briefly before walking directly toward Chad, his movements quick and deliberate. Chad turned to him, his irritation evident. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharp. The pilot stopped in front of him, his posture tense. "You need to step aside," he said, his voice firm but laced with discomfort. Chad frowned, found his confusion evident. "Excuse me," he said, crossing his arms. "Why would I need to step aside? I'm handling this." The pilot's gaze flicked to Keisha, then back to Chad. "I just received a call from the management that the owner of the plane is on board, and she's Miss Washington here." Pointing to Keisha, he said plainly, his words hitting the room like a thunderclap. The cabin erupted into gasps and murmurs. The noise socialite audibly inhaled, her eyes widening as she looked back and forth between Keisha and Chad. "She owns the plane?" he whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. The businessman nodded knowingly, his expression calm. "I had a feeling," he muttered under his breath, as though the revelation confirmed what he had suspected all along. Emma, standing near the galley, froze in place. Relief washed over her face as the realization hit her. Keisha wasn't just another passenger. She was someone far more powerful than anyone had realized. Chad, meanwhile, stared at the pilot, his face turning an alarming shade of red. That can't be true," he stammered, his voice losing its usual sharpness. "There must be some mistake." The tension on the plane was palpable, the silence only broken by the hum of the engines. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the memory of the slap still fresh in their minds. Chad stood near the aisle, his arms crossed, his defiance evident despite the growing discomfort around him. Keisha remained seated, calm and composed, her posture as poised as ever. Then, without warning, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." Passengers murmured in confusion. The businessman leaned toward Keisha, whispering, "What's happening? Why are we landing?" Keisha didn't answer. Her expression serene but unreadable. Chad's brow furrowed, his confidence faltering as she glanced nervously toward the front of the cabin. The planet touched down smoothly, and moments later, a sleek black SUV pulled up directly to the tarmac. The doors opened, and two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. They ascended the plane steps with quiet authority, their presence commanding attention. The moment they entered the cabin, "Miss Washington," one of them said warmly, their voice respectful, Everything is ready for your review. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Chad froze his face, draining of color, as the realization hit him like a wave. Miss Washington, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The assistants ignored him, their focus entirely on Keisha. Do you need anything before we proceed? One of them asked, their tone deferential. Keisha stood slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She adjusted her blazer, her calm demeanor radiating power. The passengers watched in stunned silence as Keisha finally spoke, her voice steady and commanding. I'm Keisha Washington, she began, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. I'm the owner of this plane, and I'm also the owner of this airline. Chad's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The confident, condescending flight attendant was now a pale shadow of himself, his earlier bravado replaced by sheer panic. Keisha turned her attention to Chad, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Chad, your behavior today has been nothing short of disgraceful, she said, her words cutting through the silence. You've humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and tarnished the reputation of this airline. Chad stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't know. Keisha held up a hand, silencing him. You didn't know because you didn't bother to treat me with the respect that every passenger deserves, she said firmly. Instead, you made assumptions. You acted with prejudice, and you escalated a situation that could have been handled with basic decency. The passengers nodded in agreement, their earlier silence giving way to murmurs of support, their face glowing with admiration. Mr. Henderson folded his newspaper neatly, giving Keisha an approving nod. Keisha finally stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. She straightened her blazer and looked directly at Chad, her gaze calm but commanding. There's no mistake in your actions, Chad, she said. Her tone was quiet, yet it carried an authority that silenced the entire cabin. Chad's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone to back him up, but no one came to his defense. The passengers watched silently, some with their phones discreetly raised, recording every moment. Keisha took a step closer to Chad, her voice steady. While you were busy judging me, she began, you failed to do your job. Your job is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are or what you assume about them. And now there are consequences. Chad's hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing. He wanted to argue to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, and for the first time his confidence faltered completely. Keisha gestured to the pilot. I want this addressed immediately, she said, and I want to ensure that this doesn't happen again to anyone. The pilot nodded, his demeanor professional. Understood, Miss Washington, he said. Chad took a step back, his mind swirling with panic. He looked toward the exit, his instincts screaming at him to leave before things got worse. But before he could make a move, the pilot stepped in his path, his expression firm. You're not going anywhere, he said. Keisha's gaze didn't waver. Chad, your actions today have proven that you are unfit for this position. You are fired. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Chad's face crumpled and he took a step back, his confidence completely shattered. Please, Miss Washington, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to. Keisha's expression hardened. You didn't mean to get caught, she said coldly. But you did, and now you'll face the consequences. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers boarded the plane, their presence causing a wave of murmurs among the passengers. Chad's face turned ashen as they approached. Miss Washington, one of the officers said respectfully, we received your report. Are you pressing charges? Keisha's gaze didn't waver. Yes, she said firmly. This individual assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses. I expect him to be held accountable. Chad gasped, taking a step back. Wait, this is a misunderstanding, he cried, his voice desperate. I didn't mean to. The officers stepped forward, one producing a pair of handcuffs. Sir, you're under arrest for assault, the officer said. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Chad's breathing quickened as he realized there was no way out. His gaze flicked to Keisha, who stood calm and composed, her presence a stark contrast to Chad's unraveling demeanor. Trouble had arrived, and Chad knew he couldn't escape it. This was only the beginning of his reckoning. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Chad's hands were cuffed behind his back. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to protest. Please, Miss Washington, I'm sorry, he sobbed. Keisha's expression remained impassive. "Your apology means nothing without accountability," she said quietly. "You made your choices, now you'll face the consequences." The passengers watched silently, their eyes fixed on Chad as he disappeared down the aisle. The once dominant flight attendant was now a defeated figure, his arrogance replaced by regret and humiliation. Keisha turned back to the cabin, her voice steady. As she addressed the passengers, "To everyone here, I apologize for what you had to witness today. This is not the standard of service I expect on my planes. Moving forward, we will ensure that every passenger is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." The cabin erupted into applause, clapping enthusiastically. Mr. Henderson gave a small cheer, while Mrs. Henderson set her knitting aside to clap politely. Keisha turned to Emma, the younger flight attendant who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal. "Emma," Keisha said, her tone softening, "I noticed your professionalism today. Thank you for stepping up when it mattered. You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion." Emma's eyes widened and she nodded quickly, her face lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Washington," she said softly. Keisha smiled briefly before stepping toward the exit, her assistant following closely behind. The plane's atmosphere had shifted completely, the earlier tension replaced by admiration and relief. Justice had been served, and Keisha had set an example that no one on that flight would forget. Do you think Chad deserves forgiveness, or should he face the consequences of his actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Passengers smiled at the interaction, the warmth of the moment spreading through the cabin. The nosy woman who had watched the entire ordeal with wide-eyed fascination leaned forward in her seat. "Miss Washington, you're amazing," she blurted out, her admiration shining brightly. Keisha turned toward her, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Thank you," she replied. "Remember this moment. It's always worth standing up for what's right." As Keisha stepped off the plane, the fresh air of the tarmac greeted her as the black UV waited patiently, its driver holding the door open. Her assistants walked beside her, briefing her on her next meeting, but Keisha's thoughts lingered on the events of the day. Later in a televised interview, Keisha sat in a sleek studio, her demeanor as poised as ever. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly captivated. "Miss Washington, your story has gone viral. Millions of people have seen how you handled this situation. What message do you want to send?" Keisha's gaze was steady as she answered, her voice clear and resolute. "Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said. "Everyone deserves dignity, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what others assume about them. True leadership is about setting that standard and ensuring it's upheld." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. "And what would you say to those who faced similar challenges but don't have the platform you do?" Keisha's expression softened. "I'd say that strength comes from within, even when you feel invisible. Remember your worth. You don't need a title or wealth to demand respect. You just need to stand firm in who you are." A few weeks later, Keisha boarded another flight, this time greeted by a different crew. The energy was warm, welcoming, and professional. The lead flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Washington. It's an honor to have you." Keisha returned the smile as she settled into her seat. The atmosphere felt lighter, the service impeccable, but more importantly, it was filled with respect. As she gazed out the window, watching the runway blur into the sky, a sense of peace washed over her. The events of that day had left a lasting impact, not just on the passengers and crew who had witnessed, but on everyone who had seen the story unfold. Keisha knew that her actions had turned an injustice into a lesson, one that would ripple far beyond that single flight. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the most powerful victories weren't about winning, they were about inspiring change. As the passengers settled into their seats, Keisha quietly reached for her phone in the aftermath of what had unfolded. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about changing a system that allowed prejudice and assumptions to thrive as the jet climbed higher into the clouds. Keisha settled into her seat at the front of the plane. The window beside her framed a breathtaking view of the horizon, the world below fading into a sea of blue and white. She gazed out at the endless sky, a sense of peace washing over her. This wasn't just about confronting prejudice or asserting her authority. It was about turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Keisha smiled to herself, her reflection faintly visible in the window. She knew this was just the beginning. With every decision, every policy, and every act of leadership, she was shaping a future where respect and kindness were the standard, not the exception. The plane soared higher, the engines humming softly. As it moved toward its destination, and Keisha, seated at the helm of her vision, felt a quiet triumph that no turbulence could ever shake. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Keisha spoke directly to the world. Her words carried a message that resonated far beyond the confines of the jet luxury. Jet luxury isn't about appearances, she said in a heartfelt video that quickly went viral. It's about the experience we create for everyone. True success is measured not by what you can afford, but by how you treat others. This is why I'm implementing new policies across my airline to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, feels valued and respected. The statement sparked conversations across social media, with people applauding Keisha's leadership and her commitment to change. Hashtags like "respect above all." Keisha's vision trended for days, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior and biases. If you love the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share to people around you. See you in my next video.